Imagine you're a parent taking your 3-year-old child for a walk on January 15, 1947, and you see what appears to be a mannequin because you see their arms raised over their shoulder. You take a closer look and see that this woman is in her early 20s, cut precisely at the waist and her face being slashed in the corners, making her seem like she was grinning. The autopsy revealed that there were no fingerprints or any DNA on the body because they were doused in gasoline to cover up fingerprints. This woman was Elizabeth Short. It was believed that she was tortured and held captive because of rope marks on her wrist, ankles, and neck. She was cut in half at her waist, dried of blood, and had multiple latrications to her face, head, and the official cause of death was hemorrhage and shock due to a concussion of the brain and latrication of the face. The name came to be is because of a movie called The Blue Dahlia had come out 9 months prior to the murder. Customers at a nearby pharmacy called her the Black Dahlia because of her black hair, black garments, and fair complexion. The LAPD teamed up with the Herald Express. An anonymous tip told reporters that Elizabeth had photo albums in her trunk of herself and her friends, but had gone missing because of a shipment that went wrong from Chicago to Los Angeles. Elizabeth was last seen on January 9, 1947, when she got out of a car at the Biltmore Hotel, where she wore a black suit and had a black address book. John Douglas believes that the latrications presented on Elizabeth Short's body were because of personal vendetta. Mr. Douglas believes this because of the way she was murdered and displayed in the public to showcase the faults he believed Elizabeth had caused. On January 23, 1947, the Examiner received a call from a man claiming to be the Black Dahlia killer. He told editor J.H. Richard he didn't like the way the story was being told in the papers. He said he would mail the victims belonging to the paper to prove that he did it. They received a package and a letter. It included her birth certificate, photographs, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen. Her handbag and her shoe were found in a trash can the same day. The location of the items showed that the killer was within walking distance of the vacant lot and the area where the belongings were dropped. The LAPD received many anonymous tips, but they seemed to be fake. The letters seemed to taunt the detectives. They were often convoluted and confusing. Everything that was sent to the LAPD was rinsed in gasoline, so the examiners weren't able to lift off any fingerprints of the objects. The letter, however, was not helpful because they seemed to give false information. One of the letters said, "I will give up in Dahlia killings if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." Since Elizabeth Short was carefully cut in two, the LAPD thought that her murderer had had some medical training. The first suspect was Robert Red Manley, who was the last to see her alive. Even though he wasn't a medical student on the list, he passed 2 lie detector tests, and he had an alibi for January 14 and 15, so the LAPD were looking for someone else to blame for the murder of the Black Dahlia. 60 confessed to the murder, although only 22 of them were considered suspects. Walter Bailey, a Los Angeles surgeon, lived 1 block south of the vacant lot where the Black Dahlia body was found. His daughter Barbara was a friend of Virginia, Elizabeth's sister. Bailey's widow claimed that Walter's mistress, Dr. Alexandra, had known a terrible secret about him. That's why he listed her as his main beneficiary. He died on January of 1948. His autopsy showed that he had degenerative brain disease. Larry Harnich believed that his deterioration could have caused him to prove illicit violent behavior. Elizabeth had a short period of time where she would tell others that she had a child that died in an accident. Dr. Bailey had a son that was killed by a car when he was 11. His child's birthday was on January 13th. The Black Dahlia body was found on the 15th of January. Harnich believed that he was trying to seek revenge from his son's death, and that's why he cut the facial latrications on her face. Some think that the terrible secret was that he was performing abortions on women, which is illegal at the time. Some also think that Alexandra killed Elizabeth herself, but there's no evidence to support that either. The next suspect is Norman Chandler. In Wolfe's book, The Mob, the Mogul, and the Murder that transfixed Los Angeles, Wolfe believed that Norman was involved in her death. Wolfe thought that Chandler impregnated Elizabeth while she was working as a call girl for Brenda Allen. Wolfe accused Chandler to order the gangster Bugsy Siegel to murder her, but according to her file, she was not a prostitute or pregnant. The fourth suspect is Leslie Dillon. a writer that secretly had an interest in sadism and sexual psychopaths, wrote back and forth with LAPD psychiatrists. He never confessed to the murders, but claimed that Jeff Connors, his own friend, was the killer. Dr. J. Paul de Rivers was a psychiatrist that thought that Dylan had committed the murder. He believed that he murdered Elizabeth and that Connors was not even a real man. He used Dylan as a piece of imagination to cope with the murder that he had committed. Suzanne Deegan was murdered and kidnapped in Chicago in 1946 in January. She was sliced and diced just like Elizabeth Short. Suzanne was killed by William Hearns, who confessed and sentenced to 3 life terms in the Illinois Penitentiary. In the Black Dahlia Solutions believes that Ed Burns mutilated and killed Elizabeth Short. But there was no mention of him in any FBI reports or the LAPD files. She became obsessed with the murder of Suzanne after details came out in Life magazine. And she would tell people details about the murder at bars, and she said that she was a reporter from Boston. She met a man named Ed Burns who went to USC School of Medicine. He would give her money for rent and food, but he was not very attractive, and so she did not show him off to any of her friends. So it was also hard to identify him. Elizabeth would tell stories, and the author claims that perhaps she drove him crazy with the details. The author claims that Elizabeth and Ed drove to Leimert Park, to her lover's lane, and commented on the irony of it because Deegan Boulevard driving Burns to the edge. Feeling as she idolized William Hearns more than himself, he could have tied and killed Elizabeth the same way as Deegan. The author claims that Burns committed suicide exactly 2 months after Elizabeth's murder, on March 15, 1947. The letter of his suicide said, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary." The LAPD did not come out and say that it was because it would give the police a bad rep, because this case was too well known. The next suspect is Joseph A. Dumas. One of the many false confessions he confessed after a few weeks, Joseph offered a 50-page statement on how he dated Short on January 9th to January 10th in 1947, before he had blacked out for several days, and he believes that this is when he might have killed her during his blackout. He had been seen at Fort Dix in New Jersey on January 10th, 11th, 12th, and 17th, so it was impossible for him to kill her or date her. In September of 1948, in Evanston, Illinois, for car theft. He claimed that he was held for 83 days in armed detention of Fort Dix for being connected to the murder of his quote-unquote wife, Elizabeth Short. He claimed that he married Elizabeth in 1947, which was impossible because she would have been 12 at the time. He claimed that he knew her as Eunice Fortune. He continued to say that he killed Elizabeth Short every time he was arrested into the 1950s. The next suspect is Mark Hansen. Elizabeth lived at his home many times between May and October of 1946. Mark was one of the last people that spoke to Short before she disappeared on January 1947. On January 24th, 1947, the Examiner received a package from Short's killer and included her birth certificate, photographs, business card, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. Hansen told the LAPD that he gave her the book as a gift so she could use it. It was in the LAPD district attorney's files that Hansen tried to seduce Short at one point, but she refused. He was linked to other suspects like Dr. Patrick S. O'Reilly, Dr. M.M. Schwartz, and Dr. Arthur McGinnis Fraught. Mark was the first suspect and is still a prime suspect. George Hodel is next. Police were first interested in George when he was accused of molesting his 14-year-old daughter. 3 witnesses said that they saw him committing the molestation. It led to him being out on the suspect list on February 18, 1950 to March 27, 1950. On February 19, 1950, the recording showed something horrific. At 8:25 p.m., a woman screamed. Woman screamed again. It should have been noted that the woman was not heard before the scream. Later in the day, Hodel recorded to his confinement. Realized that there was nothing I could do, put over a pillow over her head and covered her with a blanket. Get a taxi. Expired 12:59. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, they may have figured out, killed her. The surveillance routinely continued, catching a highly incriminating statement. Supposing I did the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They could talk to my secretary Noir because she's dead. The secretary was Ruth Spaulding, who overdosed and died. Holding was investigated for the murder of Spaulding. He was present when the secretary died and burnt her belongings before the police were called. So the case was dropped because of the lack of evidence. Documents later found showed that Ruth was planning to blackmail Hodel. She wanted to come forward about Hodel's intentionally misdiagnosing patients and billing them for laboratory tests, medical treatments, and unnecessary prescriptions. Hodel's son, a former LAPD homicide detective, Steve Hodel, claims that Elizabeth Short was one of the patients. Lieutenant Frank Jemison of the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office wrote in the report to the grand jury on February 20th, 1951. In Jemison's report, he said that Lillian Dornoric, who had lived with George Hodel, identified Short as one of his girlfriends. She also said that Hodel spent time at the hotel where she was last seen, the Biltmore Hotel. Tamar Hodel, George's daughter, claimed that her mother, Dorothy Hodel, said that her father was partying the night of the murder and stated that they never would be able to prove that I did the murder. Steve Hodel published a book, Black Dahlia Adventure, A Genius for Murder. He believed that his father committed the Black Dahlia murder and other unsolved murders. George Knowlton was the next suspect. Janice Knowlton claims that her father killed Elizabeth Short. She said that she saw her father beat Elizabeth to death with a claw hammer in their garage. She also claimed that her father was having an affair with Short and that Elizabeth used the garage as a bedroom. Janice said that her father forced her to join him to dispose of the body. According to Janice, her childhood was traumatic. Her mother and stepmother both died in the 80s. She claimed that her father molested her. She remembered her father with a dismembered infant and burying her in the basement. Janice claimed that her father would throw her in the furnace and kill her mother if she told anyone what she saw. Janice claims that she became close with Short and called her Aunt Betty. Janice said that the LAPD were first looking for a George that drove a tan car, which fits the description of George Knowlton, who drove a tan LaSalle. Ted Driscoll stated that he dated on Elizabeth Short's roommate and that he remembered a man's name, Georgie, at Elizabeth's apartment. The description that Ted gave was too perfect. According to Michael Newton, told the Los Angeles Times in 1993, to have another George who fit that description to me would almost be almost coincidental, beyond the realm of possibility. Janice persuaded that the police detectives search for evidence. Janice's stepsister, Jolene Emerson, told the Los Angeles Times that her book was trash, and it wasn't even true. She believed it, but it wasn't reality. I know because I lived with her father for 16 years. Patrick S. O'Reilly is the next suspect, a medical doctor that knew Elizabeth through another suspect, Mark Hansen. They both were good friends at the time of the murder. According to the district attorney's files, O'Reilly was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon for taking his secretary to a motel and sadistically beating her almost to death, apparently for no other reason than to satisfy his sexual desires without intercourse. This meant that O'Reilly had a history of violent crimes with sexual motivation. O'Reilly's right pectoral has also been surgically removed, just like the mutilation on Short's body. Bribery to cover up the murder could also take place because O'Reilly's daughter was once married to an LAPD captain. The last suspect is Jack Anderson Wilson. He was originally a suspect in the Cleveland Torso murder case, a petty criminal and alcoholic. John Gilmore interviewed Wilson and claimed that he had caused Short's death. In Gilmore's book, Severed, he claimed that Detective John St. John was about to, quote-unquote, close in on the case based on what Gilmore provided him. The statement was falsified when the files became visible to the public.